Hello stars, this is Miss Lee, your 3rd grade literacy teacher, ready to rock and roll with you through Literacy Today. Before we get started, please make sure to have a nicely sharpened pencil and a notebook with you at hand. I will be starting off Module 10 with the essential question, why is it important to pass stories down to the next generation? Are there any stories that have been passed down to you? Feel free to pause this video to think about this question. Our genre focus will be tales. No, not like a dog's tail, silly. A tale, T-A-L-E. As in a story that contains real or imagined events, like fairy tales and folk tales. Through reading these stories, we will have opportunities to identify author's purpose, theme, and figurative language in order to better understand unfamiliar text. Now, why are retelling tales important, you ask? They are important for several reasons. First, they often teach important lessons. For example, in Hungbu and Norbu, a famous Korean tale I remember reading a lot as a kid, they talk about 2 brothers, one rich and greedy, one poor and generous, and how in the end, greediness is what destroys the rich brother. Also, they tell us about a culture's beliefs. For example, Nigerians use a tale to explain why the sky is far away, and some cultures also explain why it is important to listen to nature. Another reason is to describe important events. And finally, sometimes tales are written just to make people laugh. For example, in one tale, it tells about stinky shoes instead of a glass slipper.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
That may sound like real life for some of us, right? I've smelled some stinky shoes in my time. Anyways, before we get started with why we share stories, let's preview some vocabulary. Here you see the words myth, folklore, recount, and inherit. Now, do any of these words look familiar to you? Yes, recount. We've used this skill when we had to retell stories from the beginning, middle, and end. And I've also used it to remember things that have happened in our lives. I want you to take a good look at these words and write them down in your notebook. Just write the word down and save the meaning for later. Again, feel free to pause at any time. Now put your pencils down and please read along with me. Myth. A myth is a well-known story about fantastical events that happened in the past. We read a myth about the unicorns that once lived in the woods. Folklore. Folklore is the traditional sayings, beliefs, and stories within a community. They performed a dance that was part of our folklore. Recount. If you recount a story or events, you tell how something happened. One day, my mom will recount the stories she learned from her mom. Inherit. When you inherit something, it is given to you, usually by a parent or grandparent. Someday, Sheena will inherit the jewelry her grandmother leaves her. Okay, let's get started. Please turn to page 354 in your workbooks, or just continue to follow this video. Remember, great readers track the words with their fingers or with their pencil. As we read, think about the question, why do people share stories? This will be the central idea of the text. Feel free to underline examples of people sharing stories as you find them in the text. Why we share stories. You probably know some stories that have been passed down over time. For example, there is the tale of Cinderella who loses a glass slipper and finds a prince. You may also know about Jack, the boy who climbs a beanstalk and stands up to a mean giant. Both of these tales have been around for many, many years. Why do people tell certain stories again and again? People might tell stories to teach lessons about the right way to behave. They might share stories about a people's history. A story might recount or tell about how something came to be. I want you to notice the punctuation after the word recount. Yes, it's a comma. And after that it says, or tell about. Guess what? You found your first context clue. Remember, great readers look before and after unfamiliar vocabulary to figure out its meaning. Another key word there is the word or, which is saying, hey, look at me. I might give you the definition. It might tell about a hero or give advice. All these stories together make up a people's folklore. Remember, if you're reading this story online and you notice that the words are highlighted or have a link underneath the word, then you are able to click that word and the definition will pop up. For those of you who are reading this in the workbook, You know, you can find the definition of those words in the glossary. People often pass down stories that teach lessons. For example, Cinderella is good-hearted and hardworking, and she is rewarded with true love. Jack, the beanstalk climber, is brave and adventurous, and he is rewarded with treasure. In the African folktale Jackal and Lion, a jackal is stalked by a hungry lion. The jackal uses his wits to escape. Not being eaten, that's his reward. The story teaches us we can solve problems with our wits. Lessons like these never get old. For those of you who are wondering what the word wits means, that's when you have extreme mental sharpness and you're highly intelligent. You kind of figure things out on your own. Long ago, when people had a question about how the world works, they'd make up a myth, legend, or folk tale to explain it. For example, the Native American tale Crow Brings the Daylight tells the story about the sun's movements. In the story, the Arctic, the land of the North, is always dark. Then Crow goes to the warm lands of the South and brings back light. Even though science now explains how the sun affects Earth, people still love to share this story. Long ago, it helped the people of the Arctic explain why the sun is in the sky. Above all, stories have to be entertaining. Otherwise, people would not retell them. Boring stories become forgotten over time. Long ago, stories brought people together and helped distract them from the day's worries. The funnier or more exciting the story, the better. One example is the Native American tale, Coyote and Turtle Run a Race. It tells how Turtle tricked Coyote and beat him in a foot race. It has been making people laugh for generations. If you're lucky, you may inherit some stories from your own people. Your people are probably your family, but they might also be the people in your town, in your school, or any group you spend time with. If you do hear a good story, be sure to pass it on. Every time you share a story, you are helping to keep it alive. Now, wasn't that a great read? This informational text was written at an 800 Lexile level. As we all know, third graders should be reading between a 700 to 800 Lexile level in March. Therefore, I recommend rereading this text 3 more times, either with me or independently. After reading the text 3 times, I would like you to open up your notebook, set a timer for 5 minutes, and write down the following question. Why is it important for people to share stories? Now start the timer, and for 5 minutes, I would like you to free write. That means you are writing until the buzzer goes off. The reason we do this is to build our writing stamina. Now I know while you're writing 2 minutes in, you might think, I've written everything I wanted to. Well, great writers reread their writing to make sure that it has a nice flow. Maybe add some transition words, look at your punctuation, check your capitalization, and make sure that you include ample amounts of examples. After you've completed your 5-minute free write, please refer to your packet to complete the vocabulary work.